Hey, this is Enaa in with you in the 5 pack. Today I'm going to do something a little different, a little unusual, and that's going to take some of the questions that I've been asked over the last several months. If your question is not here, it's not because I didn't read it or ponder it, it's because maybe it's been answered, maybe it would just take a longer format than I have here. And I picked kind of a random sampling of questions, both positive and negative. I appreciate the positive more than the negative, especially if the positive is more constructive criticism. I always like, hey, great job, keep it up, those type of things. But if you're saying, hey, your argument's a little shaky here, what about this point? I appreciate that. I really do. And so let's get started. First question. Right. Okay. So this is kind of unusual here. Alright. So I didn't know that Palestine was actually socialist. I thought a lot of it was still occupied, but okay. China, right? Well, maybe in name only, it's socialist, right? The borders are closed, right? Let's see. When your country tends to suffer repeated subversion from imperialist powers, you probably want to have some kind of surveillance. It kind of makes sense there. Yeah, even though Cuba and China, I guess, China even, yeah, you open the country to foreign investments and tourists. That's true. Cuba does that too. Religious. Normally, communists or socialists just get accused of being godless atheists. I kind of like the schizophrenia of anti-communists. Even kids and women train for soldiers. I would take that more seriously if you actually condemned like the ROTC that are found in high schools and colleges in capitalist countries. That they're training kids to, kill for imperialism. Just saying. Women train for soldiers. Actually, doesn't the U.S. Army actually have women soldiers? But I actually consider it a point of pride that women are treated equally in socialist armies, so I'm not taking that as criticism. Nihilists? No, I'm a communist. Nihilists really don't believe in jack squat. Slobs? Do I have food on my shirt or something? I granted my razor isn't the sharpest. I can't, but it, relatively clean shaven. I did comb my hair. This person who sent that comment, who I really am not gonna dignify with much more to say, except that he's a fascist-loving piece of crap who had a picture of that Norwegian Breivik on his profile. Way to go, you piece of crap. Okay, this person really doesn't pay attention to my videos if they're actually asking this question. I did take micro and macroeconomics, so I had to read a lot of bourgeois economics. Read some Adam Smith, Friedrich Hayek, free market capitalist book. Well, I do buy a lot of my books at bookstores, which are part of the free market, I guess. So yeah. Have I read detailed rebuttals to communism? I have read Alexander Solzhenitsyn, A Day in the Life of, and I have read Robert Conquest, What is it? The Harvest of Sorrow. In fact, I did a video on that. Let's see. I did actually read Ann Coulter's Slander. I wanted to slip my wrists after that. Do I only read communist writings? Well, no. In fact, believe it or not, I actually make it a point to listen to right-wing radio a lot. And, I have a lot of anti-communist historians, depending Jiang and Holiday on China. Trying to do that. So the fact that I'm actually willing to read anti-communist books and then discuss them on their merits instead of saying they're bad, well, yeah, I actually have. So, I'm sorry that I read more of the Class Enemies books, and I'm willing to talk about them. And apparently, you're so ignorant that I'll just leave it there. Good question, actually. I talked about the French so-called Reign of Terror, and I tend not to care that nobles died, so... And I've obviously gone more detail into that, but talking about the French Revolution in a much more comprehensive video would just be a lot of work, and it require a lot of resources. I plan on doing some stuff on aspects of the French Revolution, the conspiracy of equals, if I get a chance. So, aside from certain aspects, no, but hopefully more in the future. Okay, Mao's name is not that hard to spell. I mean, seriously. Mao. M-A-O. It's just 3 letters for that. And actually, Mao is, granted, there's a lot of hypocrisy behind it, but even the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party still uphold Mao, and he's actually rather popular in the countryside and the cities. And a lot of Chinese Marxists who are still actually Marxists are read Mao, discuss Mao, and his principles are, very much alive in China. So I don't know where you're getting your information from, but maybe you could actually cite sources instead of just a bold statement that you can't even spell the person's name. Just pointing that out. Obviously, you didn't really listen to the video if you said about stuff that happened around your house. The fact that you kind of need political consciousness in these revolts. I kind of pointed that out. Kind of need some kind of political leadership. So, yeah, why not have? If you were so concerned about that, why weren't you there telling them to strike at the symbols of government and political power, forming some form of dual power? It makes sense. Violence is never the answer, and war is the only way to stop the growth of mankind. Well, there are just and there are unjust wars. For instance, the U.S. wars in, say, Iraq and Afghanistan are unjust because they're for the benefit of imperialist oligarchies, and therefore they should be condemned outright. However, by the logic of pacifism, somehow those wars are equated with, say, an anti-fascist war, the war of the Spanish Republic against fascist aggression, or the war of the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany. Yeah, I'm actually going to take the side of those who want to fight against fascism, fight for, say, national independence in Vietnam, the struggle of the National Liberation Front in Vietnam for freedom from U.S. imperialism and colonialism. That was just. On the other side, the war of U.S. imperialism to keep the country a dependent neo-colony, well, that was unjust. So I'm going to make that distinction. Okay, I actually kind of answered this when it was first asked, but I do want to go a little more in depth into it. This was about comparing the U.S. to the USSR, and in a sense, the U.S. had a lot of problems breaking away from Great Britain. There was a war, it went on for 7, 8 years, and there was a lot of trouble to establish a new government constitution. And it was only about, I believe, 1787 when the Constitution was actually established. And but to be fair, the U.S. War of Independence, yes, people died, there was devastation. I'm not denying that, and certain portions of the country did resemble a civil war zone. But the scale in the Soviet Union during the Russian Civil War was so much greater, so much more destructive that millions died as opposed in during the Russian Civil War as opposed to thousands died in the U.S. Civil War. And the U.S. economy did pick up within a few years of the War of Independence. And in the Soviet Union, you had the fact that just when the country is really getting back on its feet in the 30s and the early 40s, you have another devastating war of Nazi Germany, where 27 million died. And yes, the War of 1812, wars are it's a war, but it was certainly not on the scale of the World War II. And another difference that should be pointed out, I personally never considered the American Revolution to be a revolution. It didn't really overturn the social order in a similar sense that the Russian or the Chinese revolutions did. And just to look at the American Revolution, yeah, there were changes. There was, in a certain sense, there was an expansion of the franchise for voting. As a result, in many northern states, slavery was slowly eked out, but it was more a restoration because a lot of the thinking of the independence leaders in the United States was more about we are our rights as citizens of the British Empire have been taken away. And yes, it did establish a republican form of government, but if you actually read the Federalist Papers, a lot of it is designed to keep the popular will from influencing government. That's part of the reason for the Electoral College, to make sure that people don't have too much of a say. And I would consider more revolution if, the slaves had actually been liberated, all of them. So I would actually consider the American Revolution, in a sense, to be the Civil War when slaves were freed. In the Russian Revolution, the nobility was wiped out, capitalism was gone, whole systems of privilege and power were eliminated, and women within a year from 1917 to 1918 were given full and equal rights and full and equal pay. And the whole illegitimacy of children, which had been a staple of Tsarism, was gone. The right of divorce was brought in, and national self-determination as well. Just the whole scale of the Russian, or we could have, of course, add the French Revolution, was just so much greater than the American War of Independence. That's not to say that changes weren't wrought during that war. It was, but I would not put it on the same scale as the Russian Revolution. This is actually a good question, and I really want to do much more extensive on it than this. And I kind of alluded to it. I consider the American Civil War to actually be the American Revolution because 4 million slaves became free, and that to me it just destroyed a whole social order. And it's probably, in my opinion, one of the few just wars that the United States has ever fought. So I probably actually would have fought in it. I'm kind of upset that all the slave owners at the end of the war weren't just lined up and shot. But That's pretty much my short answer. And the Confederacy, well, I think everyone should have a Confederate flag. You kind of need toilet paper if you run out. Okay, T.E. Lawrence or Lawrence of Arabia. That's a good question. Well, based on my understanding of Lawrence of Arabia, he was during World War One. The Ottoman Empire was pretty much ruling what a lot of the countries that are now in the Middle East. For instance, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, Palestine. All of that was pretty much Ottoman territory, and parts of Saudi Arabia as well. And Lawrence was sent in as a British agent, as you were, to work with Arab leaders who wanted independence from the Ottoman Empire and to encourage and mobilize them for that struggle. Because World War One, we tend to hear about whether the Eastern Front or the Western Front in Europe, but it was a global war. There were battles fought in the Middle East, in Africa, in the Pacific, and a lot of these Arab leaders were promised, you'll be fully independent and so on and so forth by Lawrence. But the British and of course the French empires are empires. They're really not too interested in you know pol- uh, political freedom for populations. So a lot of these promises were kind of not kept, or contradictory promises were given to different groups of Arab leaders, and in for or also to Zionism, which was promised a homeland in what is now Israel. But at the same time, promises were given to Arabs by British leaders to get support for the war. And so a lot of it after the war, a lot of this region of the Middle East, whether Iraq, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria, were all occupied in some fashion by colonial powers. And when independence was given, it was really given to, say, neo-colonial regimes or monarchs in some sense. This was when these were not republics in many senses. It would take further struggle in many of these cases, and in some it's still going on to actually establish a republican form of government. So Lawrence was pretty much an agent of British power, trying to mobilize these people on behalf of the British Empire to further their struggle against the Ottoman Empire. And whether some Arabs certainly probably believed a lot of Lawrence's promises, hence the feeling of betrayal. And also the Middle East, even by the World War One era, it was known that there was oil there, and Britain kind of also wanted a stake in that, because remember, the British actually did occupy Iraq and had a lot of concessions there from the oil regions. Oh wow, wow, man! All right. I'm not an apologist for a murderous ideology. You mean capitalism? You know, capitalism. Well, let's see. Well, let's go down the list on this one. All right, we got well, NATO intervention in Libya. Oh man, we got. I could just go down the list on this. We got Iraq, Afghanistan. We got continual famines. We got World War One. We got World War Two. Oh, I'm actually going to post a list. Okay, you're probably thinking, oh, because I'm a communist, I'm an apologist for, I don't know, Pol Pot. Have I ever actually come out and said I approve of Pol Pot or something like that? Alright, listen. You obviously don't watch my videos. You kind of probably bought into all the propaganda crap that you were mistaught in school. Or taught, actually. So you kind of believe all of that. And why don't you actually look at the list provided by another great channel, the Mouse Rebel News, of some of the depths of capitalism. And if you're willing to acknowledge that and kind of, you know, discuss on a rational level instead of just name calling as you're doing, well, we can actually have a discussion. But I think you're probably not going to do that. But it's out there for everyone else. And as for communism, well, I've actually showed critiques of various from various communist thinkers, for instance, on the Soviet experience. You can agree or disagree with them if you want, but I actually dealt with that. As I said earlier, I actually read anti-communist books and dealt with their arguments. I wonder if you've actually dealt with communism beyond the caricature you were taught in school. No, I would think not. No, I think that's everything. So, both the good and the bad. I'm quite glad to get a lot of these questions. Keep sending them. Keep sending comments. Keep viewing videos. I appreciate pretty much everything. I would actually prefer, of course, more constructive criticism than just name calling. But there you go. So this is Enaa saying